so forces a new waitress to crawl like a dog. The next day, she destroys his billion empire. At Mitchell's Fine Dining, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Chicago, elegance reigned. All glass windows welcomed the morning sun, spilling golden light across marble floors so expensive they seemed untouchable. The air smelled of roasted coffee and freshly polished wood, the kind of perfection that existed only for the wealthy who could afford it. 34-year-old Isabella Martinez tightened the crisp, white apron around her waist. Only 3 weeks into this job, she already felt the weight of survival pressing against her chest. Once, she had walked into corporate boardrooms wearing $1,000 suits, armed with spreadsheets and confidence. But after losing her job and draining her savings to pay for her mother's chemotherapy, Isabella had no choice but to start over. Waiting tables wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. Every paycheck meant another treatment for her mother, another month of life bought. She moved gracefully among the tables, her smile warming even the coldest customer. Years of corporate customer service had taught her poise and patience. Still, nothing could prepare her for the man she was about to face. Richard Harrison. At 42, he was more than a successful businessman, he was feared. Owner of 17 upscale restaurants across 3 states, his empire dripped with wealth and cruelty. The staff at Mitchell's went silent whenever he appeared. His icy blue eyes measured people as if they were inventory, and his presence carried a chill that no fireplace could warm. When Isabella approached his table that afternoon, Harrison didn't look up from his phone. His companion, an anxious man in a tailored suit, shifted nervously as if Harrison's moods alone could ruin careers. Isabella introduced herself politely, offering to help with the wine list. Harrison's laugh cracked through the dining room like breaking glass. 3 weeks, he scoffed. I built this empire for 15 years. Do you think I want some amateur ruining a lunch worth more than your annual salary? The room hushed. Dozens of eyes turned to Isabella. She felt her cheeks burn, but her voice stayed steady. She excused herself, retreating to the manager. James, shifting uncomfortably, reminded her of the truth. Harrison owned 30% of Mitchell's. He was untouchable. All she could do was avoid him. But Harrison wasn't finished with her. Hours later, as Isabella poured coffee at his table, he caught sight of a small photo left behind by another guest. Seeing it, he said coldly, "Show me what service means." When she knelt to wipe it away, his voice sliced through the silence. "Lower, crawl like you mean it." The marble floor was icy beneath her hands and knees. The weight of humiliation pressed harder with every second as Chicago's wealthy elite watched. Some guests whispered in disgust. An elderly woman rose from her seat, calling the act barbaric. Harrison only smirked, sipping his espresso, satisfied with his cruelty. Unbeknownst to him, a food blogger at table 14 had captured the entire scene on video. Isabella barely made it to the restroom before tears came. Alone against the cold tile, she crumbled. The shame was unbearable. Just months ago, she had presented reports to executives. Now she was crawling on the floor like an animal. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, asking how her day was, completely unaware of the humiliation Isabella endured for her sake. Janet, the head waitress, found her in the break room. At 58, with years of experience, Janet carried a quiet strength. She comforted Isabella, but her eyes burned with anger. She told Isabella what many already suspected: Harrison's empire wasn't as flawless as it looked. Whispers of health code violations, stolen wages, bribes, even staff who had vanished after speaking up. A journalist named Rachel Morrison had been digging into him for months. Then fate struck. Janet's phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. An anonymous source had leaked Harrison's financial records. Federal investigators were circling. By dawn, the world had shifted. Reporters swarmed Mitchell's. News vans lined the street. The video of Isabella crawling had exploded online, spreading with hashtags like "Justice for Isabella" and "Harrison Chain." Overnight, she had become a symbol. Inside, the staff huddled around the two as reporters confirmed the FI had raided Harrison's headquarters at Ann. They seized 5 years of documents, evidence of tax fraud, money laundering, and systematic labor violations. Investors panicked. Stocks plummeted. The empire trembled. At noon, Harrison stormed into the restaurant, his once perfect suit wrinkled, his face wild with fury. He spotted Isabella and pointed a shaking finger. You did this." She stood taller than she had in months. "No," she said evenly. "You did this to yourself." His rage boiled over, but before he could act, agents entered through the doors. "Richard Harrison, you are under arrest." Handcuffs clamped around his wrists. The man who had forced her to crawl was dragged out, powerless. Applause broke out among the staff, relief and vindication echoing in the air. That afternoon, Isabella received a call from a prestigious law firm. They wanted her as a consultant for labor rights cases. Her business background and first-hand experience gave her a voice that mattered. She accepted, knowing her humiliation had been transformed into purpose. Months later, she stood in her new office, head held high, leading a workers' rights division. Her mother's treatments were secured, their home filled with sunlight and roses in the garden. Janet worked at a community center that had replaced Michelle's, training others to rebuild their lives. Harrison's empire crumbled. He received a 7-year prison sentence. His assets were liquidated to pay hundreds of workers he had exploited. Isabella's story spread nationwide. She testified before Congress, helped draft new protections for service workers, and inspired thousands. She often thought back to that day on the marble floor. What once seemed like breaking had become her rising. Letters poured in from across the country, from workers who found their courage through her story. "You showed me nobody has the right to make us small," one letter read. Isabella kept a framed photo on her desk, not of her success, but of the community center that had once been the site of her humiliation. It reminded her daily that cruelty always collapses, but dignity endures. Her crawling had become her soaring, and her pain had become the foundation of a movement that would outlast any empire built on cruelty.